Beneath that sinister pall of smoke, the world's most destructive force has been unleashed, with what results we know only too well.
After World War II ended with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the two remaining superpowers. Their ideological and geopolitical rivalry led to the Cold War, an arms race in which both countries competed to develop the most powerful weapon. After the bombing, there was a significant increase in the need for uranium, as it was a key component in the creation of atomic weapons. This prompted the U.S. to develop uranium mines starting in the 1950s. The Church Rock uranium mine was opened in 1968 in New Mexico. This mine produced 2 million tons of uranium oxide annually. However, in 1979, the dam containing all the wastewater and radioactive materials ruptured, resulting in the largest uranium spill in American history. The government has the responsibility to protect its citizens and the right to defend the country. U.S. citizens have the right to life and protection of their properties. When potentially dangerous disasters occur, the government has a responsibility to respond quickly and effectively to the emergencies, no matter who is affected. The state and federal government violated the rights of the citizens to life and property, outlined in the Declaration of Independence and the 14th Amendment, by their neglect of the responsibility to respond quickly and effectively to the Church Rock spill.
The United Nuclear Corporation initiated mining operations for the Church Rock mine in 1968. At the time, this mine was known as the largest underground mine in the United States. Built on the Navajo Reservation, parts were within miles of residential areas, which threatened safety of locals. The waste from this mine was dealt with in 3 lined lagoons that were fortified by a dam. However, this dam was built on geologically unsound land, which later was the cause of the dam's collapse. After investigation, it was uncovered that the UNC and federal agencies had known about this issue, but had decided to take no action to fix it. By ignoring this problem, the government disregarded the rights of citizens. On July 16, 1979, the dam containing all radioactive waste burst, spilling more than 1,100 tons of uranium waste and 94 million gallons of radioactive water into the Puerco River. The residential areas surrounding the mine were almost entirely owned by Navajo people who relied on the Puerco River as a water source for livestock. Studies even revealed over 1,000 times more radioactivity in the drinking water than the normal amount. Uranium has a half-life of 4.5 billion years, meaning it continues to contaminate the environment for many years to come. If uranium enters the bloodstream, a tiny fraction will stay in the bones for many years, which can lead to disease and is irreversible. The radiation released from the spill has enough energy to affect the atoms in living cells, which causes damage to their DNA. Many studies have shown an increased risk of cancer in people who were exposed to radiation, such as an atomic bomb or uranium miners. The Navajo residents have since endured many severe health problems, including different types of cancer, kidney disease, or even severe birth defects. This not only affects humans, but also affects livestock. The government did almost nothing to help clean up the situation they created, removing only 1% of the spilled waste, leaving the Navajo Nation to deal with the rest on their own. By the lack of response, the federal government neglected their responsibility to protect the lives of their citizens. This neglect allowed the contamination to leak into the bodies, even DNA, of Navajo residents, livestock, and native animals, harming their health and, in some cases, even killing them.
2 aquifers nearby were also contaminated with radioactive waste, while the rest of the wastewater washed 130 kilometers downstream. Pictures from days after the spill showed the normally brown water turned yellow with contamination. Since the Navajo people were not informed of the danger of the river until days after the spill, many continued to let their livestock drink from the contaminated water. When tested, sheep and goats that consumed tainted water had higher levels of radiation in their tissues, posing a health risk to people who later on consumed parts of the animals. After the spill, there were even reports of animals and livestock developing sores due to ingestion of contaminated materials. The carelessness exhibited by the state and federal government toward the safety of Navajo residents illustrates how their right to life was largely disregarded, while their homes and properties became contaminated with high levels of radioactivity. After the spill, the UNC halted mining. Because of this, they were losing over $200,000 in profit every day. David J. Hannum, Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the United Nuclear Corporation, stated that more delay will force us to reduce our workforce substantially. Mr. Hannum's statement revealed the true worry of the UNC was the loss of profits, not the safety of their miners or the affected regions. Despite the urgent state of emergency in the Navajo Nation, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission permitted the UNC to resume mining operations November 2, 1979. Even though the government has the right to continue uranium mining, they also have the responsibility to protect the rights of the people. The responsibility of defense does not trump the people's right to life or protection of their property and their health. It is possible for them to support both rights at the same time, but by choosing to sacrifice the well-being of their citizens for the production of uranium, the government abandoned their responsibility to the people. Doug Brugge is a professor and chair of the Department of Public Health and Sciences at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine. In an interview about the government's responsibility during the Church Rock mine disaster, he states that
the U.S. government was complicit in creating the problem, and then I think they were slow and then resisted to addressing the problem, and that continues. You're both very young. That is a 50 to 60-year legacy.
In 1983, the mine was temporarily closed for renovations, but later was declared permanently closed because of a depressed market for uranium. Despite the fact that the government had a large amount of time to respond to the spill, less than 1% of the waste was cleaned up, leaving the Navajo Nation alone to deal with the 500-plus abandoned radioactive mines littered about the area, many actively contaminating the soil and water. Shortly after, the UNC Church Rock Mill was placed on the Environmental Protection Agency's National Priorities List.
The Navajo Nation felt the impacts of the spill for years to come. Locals began to get sick with cases of lung cancer where previously there were none. A 1984 study indicated that out of 32 Navajo men who were diagnosed with lung cancer, 72% had worked in the past as uranium miners. The average age for lung cancer in past uranium miners was 44, but in non-miners it was 63. At a hearing before the Senate Committee on Labor and Human Resources, it was estimated that 500 to 600 of the thousands of uranium miners died of lung cancer between 1950 and 1990. The majority of these deaths were associated with radon exposure. Similar numbers continued after 1990. Unfortunately, the spill didn't affect just miners. It also affected residents who lived near contaminated sites or downwind from the spill. One woman named Edith Hood, a representative from Red Water Pond Community Association who lived through the spill, has recently been diagnosed with cancer, likely due to the uncontrolled levels of radiation and contamination where she lives. Part of her testimony, she said,
I know that a lot of people have come and gone. They never knowing what took them. So it's like a slow genocide over there.
Another part of the responsibility of the government is to be transparent with their mistakes and to be accountable for their actions. In both of these ways, the government failed to comply. 4 months prior to the Church Rock uranium spill, the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor meltdown occurred. After this, the government put into effect immediate changes to the nuclear regulatory measures to make it more safe. This demonstrates the government's capacity to take appropriate measures following a nuclear disaster, as well as the stark difference in response between the two events. 3 Mile Island occurred in a densely populated area in Pennsylvania, versus out in the desert where only the Navajo people lived. The government didn't feel as obligated to respond, even though they had just as much of a responsibility to protect the less densely populated minority community. The United States government has a long history of othering, persecuting people that are not white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. At the very start of colonization, natives were expelled from their land and enslaved. The history of Native Americans in the U.S. is a bloody and gruesome one. The government's response to the Church Rock incident is a display of this deeply rooted institutional racism.
Church Rock was a devastating disaster that was completely avoidable. By taking no action to support the Navajo community after the spill, the government failed in their responsibility to protect the rights of people to life and property, outlined in both the 14th Amendment and the Declaration of Independence. In 2008, the government enacted their first cleanup plan. However, this plan came 25 years too late, as the damage had already been done.